Welcome, everyone. My name is Christina Zakowski, and I have pastor and author and spiritual abuse survivor, and now someone who works with spiritual abuse victims, Ken Garrett, with me today. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
I'll let you introduce you and all the things that you do for yourself.
Okay. Well, as you said, welcome me. I am Ken Garrett. I'm a native of Portland, Oregon. I've lived here all my life. So is my everybody in my family. Um, and I am a pastor of an old historic downtown Portland church. It used to be a German church, and it's been around about 140 years. And I've been doing that for about 20 years. And before that, I was a paramedic here in Portland for 20 years. And I joined an abusive church. And so, in the process of belonging to that church when I was a younger man and leaving it, I am a survivor of pretty severe spiritual abuse along with my family. And yeah, I'm a survivor of spiritual abuse, a pastor of a Christian church now, and I also, in the last, I don't know, 5 or so years, have developed. I don't really call it an outreach or a ministry because it's really not that. It's not. It's my church gives me a really nice budget to do it, but the understanding is I am basically caring for and looking out for survivors of all forms of coercive demand and spiritual emotional abuse as it occurs in a lot of Christian churches, but also in Eastern cults, various New Age cults, Scientology, and things like that. White supremacy, which is a pretty big deal out here, and internet cults. These are just some of the people, polygamous cults, that the people that have come into it. And the way I do that is every couple of months I have what's called a meetup at a local bar, and it's really not right to call it a bar. It's this huge, wonderful complex that is an old grade school here in Portland. It's called the Kennedy School, and they've made it into a huge microbrewery with restaurants and a theater and community rooms and a hot tub and bars and everything. It's just a really cool place to hang out. So every couple of months, we use a room there to have a meetup for survivors of spiritual abuse and coercive groups from everywhere and from all backgrounds. And the main thing we do is educate about the processes of spiritual abuse and coercive control, totalism, if that's kind of your language for it. We provide bits of discussion about that from myself and a couple of partners that help me with it, and then we try to foster a very relaxed kind of environment for people to just kind of hang out with other survivors, talk about what they want, comment, question. And this is a great meetup because I try to undo the things that spiritual abuse does, like make sure you come back. No, you might not ever come back. That's okay. Give some money to contribute. No, it's totally free. Mind your P's and Q's. No, come when you want, leave when you want, grab a beer and a piece of pizza from the place on walking in, and just no worries. And give your information, give your email and all that. No, not unless you want to stay in touch. But so we're very overtly avoiding some of the triggers of abusive churches, which really work toward recruitment, toward disempowering members that come to it, and focusing it around a personality like me. We're not trying to start the Ken Garrett ministry to spiritual abuse survivors. So we just tried to do that in order to create a safe format. That's why it's called SAFE, the Spiritual Abuse Forum for Education. It's spelled safe, and I couldn't resist it. That was just such a great acronym. So we took it. My wife said, "You got to go with that." So that's what we are, is safe. And I wanted to have a group that was very low impact and low commitment,
Mm.
so that somebody who was either in a group like that or leaving a group like that, or maybe the family member of somebody in a hurtful group, um, but could not afford counseling,
Mm.
or because that's a biggie for us survivors, is finding counseling. Even finding a counselor who knows about this stuff can be very challenging. So we wanted to have a group that was such a cool kind of a drop-in thing that fit with our culture here in the Northwest. We love microbreweries and all of that, and to just kind of keep it laid back. And so we really built that, and that's our hope, is that we provide a place that a person who is leaving an abusive group, be it a church or cult or whatever, could immediately come and join us and find friends and some information. Like everybody asks when they leave a group like that, is what the heck just happened to me? You know, where have I been for 12 years? Everybody has those questions, and we just wanted to find a safe place to land. And that also was, as I increased my studies after going to seminary and going into the ministry, and uh, and it was not a seamless process. When I left my group, I needed some healing time, and that goes on to this day, really. But I went back to school to pursue a doctorate of ministry, and my dissertation um, study was on abusive Christian churches, how to, how to understand them and heal from them. That's my book.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write a book that somebody could be handed when they leave a group like that, especially a church, since I'm a pastor and that's kind of my area. I wanted to write a book that somebody could, you could hand it to them and they would not have to commit to a 30-day reading project of a big thick tome about psychological, and I mean that stuff's fascinating, but when you're traumatized, it's really hard. So my book is very simple and short, and that's really what's reflected in our safe meetups, to try to just be kind of a almost a field hospital away from the big hospital, to where you can receive immediate care and a positive direction, even if you're, you know, not even ready to call it a cult. I mean, maybe you'll never be ready, but maybe you leave it and you're not comfortable with that word, and I can certainly understand that. But still, you know, you were hurt and something was not right, that was bad, and we just wanted to do that.
Yep. That was a fascinating overview of that history and explaining the yeah, this community that you are creating. I have a little guy coming to check in on me. Hi, gehst du mal zu Papa? Let's run with Papa.
Oh, hey, little guy.
So my question about the title of your book, it's called In the House of Friends. Can you say
Yeah.
more on the choice for that title?
Yeah, that is taken from, is it
Yeah.
Zechariah?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, it speaks of a situation that does not completely relate to this, but I've always been intrigued by that term. And they ask somebody, "Where were you wounded?" And he says, "I was wounded in the house of my friends." And in the context of that particular verse, it is not speaking about an abusive church. It's the guy who got wounded is, I think, the bad guy in it. So I don't press heavily on that analogy from it, but I was so intrigued by the concept of experiencing trauma and injury from a place that is not only a house or a home, you could say, but is also a place full of your friends. And even to this day, um, I showed you a picture earlier of the group that I was in. Even to this day, those people who, many of them who remained in the group, they were very close friends of mine. Not in a fake way, and not in a way like I realize they're all devils or something like that. Just some of them stayed and are still victims, but they were very close friends of mine, and my wounds came from a house that I considered full of my friends. So I just wanted something that would kind of communicate the betrayal of relationship that happens in spiritual abuse.
So in the house of
Yes.
friends, that is so smart. I feel like that hits the nail on it, because if it had been all evil, we would have all left right away.
Oh
And
yeah.
just like those frogs that were put in lukewarm water, it got hotter and hotter slowly and carefully. And that's the subtlety of
Yes.
it. And so we were all in the same boat in that way, especially if you were born into it. I mean, that was what you knew. So thank you for sharing your story. And when I opened your big book and I read the first few pages, what I was instantly able to connect with is your zeal. You wanted to make a difference in this world. You wanted to be part of something that was
Yeah.
powerful and good. I felt exactly the same way. Will you say a little bit more of how you feel that has changed from a positive influence to maybe even realizing that you were one of the bad guys?
Yeah, yeah. In many ways, when I look back upon it, Sharon, my wife Sharon, she described it really good. Just yesterday, I think she was saying we were, in our own ways, very pious people. We were not like fundamentalistic. I grew up a Lutheran, and she grew up a Baptist, but we weren't like fundamentalisty, no drinking, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's Portland, right? So I mean, yeah, it just wasn't the big deal, but we were very zealous about our faith. Um, we we were very impacted by the ministry of Keith Green. Loved his music. He was an American Christian gospel singer and wonderful musician and preacher and everything. And he died in a plane crash. But we had been very influenced by him, and we were married in 1982, and soon after he died. But we were really impacted by that, and we really wanted a form of Christianity that would just be a life, an orientation, day in, day out, not just Sunday. And we were in the military when I was married. When we were married, I was stationed at Fort Bragg, that's in North Carolina. And by the time we came home to Portland after being married for a year or a year and a half, we really were sure that we wanted something, what we would have described as very intense. We called it discipleship. We wanted, you know, I wanted more spiritually mature men in the church to disciple me, and Sharon wanted that too because I was such a mess. She wanted more experienced men to disciple me. We joke around a lot about whether she really wanted discipleship because, I had a little rougher approach to life than she did. But nonetheless, we were both looking for community in that kind of an environment around Christianity. We were even exploring communal living at a couple of communes and Christian farms around here where everybody, lived together and shared the land and raised our kids knowing the Bible and loving Jesus and all of this, I mean, really great, wonderful things. Um, so we were very vulnerable with this deep, deep desire to live this kind of faith. I also had a very strong desire to preach. Um, I had majored in theater in college, and had a very outgoing kind of personality, and just wanted to preach, and read the Bible over and over and over and over again. And I mean, I was very legit on that. So we were very vulnerable when we discovered, or visited this little church in our town that was meeting in a living room full of young people like us. We were pregnant with our first child at that time when we went, and talked the same language of commitment and zeal and evangelism and Bible study and community living and sharing life together. I think now people call it doing life. Maybe not the best term to use, but it really reflects where we were at. And this is 1984, and so we joined this church, and our zeal just kept us really giving more and more to the church, wanting friendship. I think Sharon was probably much more focused on the relationships and a quality network of women, mothers, and just people in the church. I was pretty darn ambitious and wanted to plant a church. And that was the idea of the churches, that we would plant churches. We talked of it in terms of planting churches up and down the I-5 corridor, you
Mm.
know. And that was never really in the works by our pastors thinking,
Oh.
but it drew people like me.
Mm.
So as the church progressed, and increasing amounts of our lives were given over to it, I mean, selling houses to live closer to the church, to, I think at one point we had 14 houses or apartments all in the same block, just to be bringing Christ to this neighborhood and blessing it, and all of these words, the language we use. Um, and so we had made all of these decisions to result in that, to where finally we ended up all living together in large houses that we would rent, up on a mountain at the outskirts of town, and we lived communally, like that. So my zeal just, both of us, but I really pushed for this myself very hard, because I know my zeal was so tinged with ambition, and a lot of the kind of guilt and shame that young people, I guess, of all genders and everything, but certainly as a young man, that I carried with me, from how I'd grown up and things that I'd done, and all kinds of things that I just had not really made peace with about myself. So I was really set up for this conversion religion experience, in my Christian faith. And that zeal really powered me through about the first 6 years of being in this group. Constant Bible studies. We learned Greek. I went to a seminary to learn Hebrew along with Greek, studied church history, theology, evangelized our not our neighborhood, but our city. Every couple of weeks, we'd go knocking on doors. My fellow Portlanders really loved that on a Saturday morning. you know. um,
Have
but we were
you met
just,
Jesus?
yeah,
So
that was
that
interesting. But
so this far it sounds like, well, it was your life. When did you realize that you have maybe that what you do has consequences that were unintended?
that was after 1990 or so. I joined in 84, and by 90 we were living communally and all of that. And I started, realizing some tremendous consequences, along with really everyone else in the church. And the church was about 40 or 50 people. Okay, so it was a small, kind of a little church. Um, the consequences was the horrible isolation between my wife and I. These abusive churches really are hard on marriages. Mostly they're young marriages, and a young marriage does not need to be burdened by giving away all the money you make. And it does not need a constant separation of the partners in the marriage. It needs, you need to learn how to raise your kids, make a house, pay your bills, all of the stuff that we need to learn. So at that point in my life of our marriage, the discipleship focus and the loyalties between the pastor and the people in the church, all of us, and also kind of a falling out with me and the pastor. He didn't, I won't say he hated me, but he really viewed me as either an annoyance or a threat to him.
Yeah.
I think he always thought I wanted to get his position or something, because I love to preach and I wanted to I preach at downtown missions and just anything I could. And so there was a lot of conflict between us. His behavior toward me, toward my wife, toward the other women in the church, and toward the men, which was different, humiliation and seduction and deceit, and toward the children, which in years to come, was just, it came out in how criminal he was in all of this, along with um, our own insanity as a community, as a church, really started, the wheels really started coming off in my life, in my marriage, professionally as a paramedic, um, with drug abuse, self-medicating, uh, which was kind of my bag. I started using a lot of drugs during that time, which is amazing. I kept my job as a paramedic, but I'm not the first paramedic that kept his job doing that, so I don't feel that unique. But it was terrible, and so I was really dealing with my stress through alcohol and drugs, and I think after a couple of years of that, um, it became very clear to me that I was going to die, because the drugs were serious stuff. It was narcotics and hard stuff, and I'm a paramedic, so every day I'm going to work dealing with hard stuff, drugs, and it became clear to me that besides the drugs, the state of my marriage was simply not going to last. Sharon and I were not going to make it. That everything was falling apart in our lives, and my ambition left me completely drained, empty. And by the time I was ready to walk out the door, not even knowing the full extent of all of the stuff going on with this guy, I it's funny, I never doubted my relationship with God during my time in this Christian cult. That's pretty tough. Some people just kind of go, well, you should have, but um, I knew of the quality of my relationship as having a lot of ups and downs. But in terms of believing in him and seeing him as separate and distinct from my church and my pastor, I didn't have a problem with that. And so as I hit bottom, basically, I started talking to God, and my conversation was, I will live, I will live in a garage. Um, I will, I'll live in a garage with my family and my daughters. I had 3 daughters at that time. Um, and I will never presume to be in ministry again. I realize I'm walking away from the place that you brought me. That was just the way I was thinking. I want to escape and walk away from that place. I know that makes me a cruddy Christian. I know I need to stay and repent and get my life together and get in line. And I know that this is destroying my chances to be a pastor because I was 35 or 36 and I had no seminary training or anything. And quite frankly, I believed any church that really knew me probably wouldn't want me for a pastor. Um, so for me, it was the death of my ambition and my aspirations to be in as a leader and a pastor in a church. And I reached a point where I went to a different mountain. There's mountains all over here, and we lived on a mountain, but I went to a mountain on the other side of this little valley to pray. And it was important to me to be away from the area where I'd lived. I went to a private, different place, and I prayed for the first time, God, get me out of here. I'll walk away from everything. I realize I can't have the things I dreamed of, but I've got a good job. I had cleaned up in terms of the drugs. I'd had a couple of years clean, and I knew that that was done for me. And I said, I just want my marriage and my children. If I can just have that, I will. Basically, I was telling God, I'll leave you alone for the rest of my life. And please don't strike me dead, because we kind of believe that might happen too. And that was the bottom and the end of my ambition for everything. And it wasn't too much longer that I was out. And Sharon had been through her own process. We didn't communicate at all with each other. We didn't even realize we were on the same sheet of music of wanting to leave until just a couple of months before we left. And there was even a point where I had kind of come out to the pastor and and the other deacons. We had elders and deacons, and I had been a deacon, and I kind of came out and said, I'm planning on moving out. And I bought myself a little time by saying, oh, I won't leave the church. I just want to, live on my own to be a better father and learn how to blah, blah, blah. I just wanted to get out and keep my wife with me. We were so estranged that it was a distinct possibility she would leave me for leaving the church, because we did separate people and we had marriages break up. And so, I mean, I think of it now, and it's just shocking to me. But I do recall the day when I told him that, and of course, I was a persona non gratis from that moment on in the church. It was really, no going back after that. And my friends wouldn't talk to me, and only secretly, and all of this. But I do recall asking Sharon and we'd been married at this point in time for about, I don't know, 15 years or so. And I do recall asking her if she would leave with me if I left. It made sense to me to say that to my wife.
Oh, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's going, oh yeah. And then I thought, oh, thank you, God. But we were so screwed up that I honestly, we just didn't know each other. So that was the moment when everything fell apart. And of course, things didn't get better right when I left, but they got a little bit better every day. But that we entered into that process that we didn't think we would be facing, but the torturous process of recovery from this kind of abuse.
Yeah, you're really not groomed or trained to actually think for yourself under an abusive leader. So as soon as you make clear that you kind of want to distance yourself a little bit, like any kind of healthy, let me do this on my own for a little bit, that is alarm bells for a narcissist.
Oh yeah.
You got it. Yes. And then that's actually, I have come to believe that is almost a gift, because they turn up the heat a little bit. And that makes it just even more clear. Of course, in a very abused person and a very codependent person, it can also lead to this, oh, I want things to be good again, like they were in the beginning. And so that's what in my cult seemed to happen again and again and again. It's this, I have to leave, but then, oh no, I can't leave because I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to be struck dead. And I want things to be as good and as promising as they used to be in the beginning. And so here we go again.
Yeah.
You repent and you die to yourself a little bit more. And you do that,
Yes.
you do that, you do that, and
Yeah.
then you realize at some point there's no more hope for that authenticity or something that you're looking for. Because we kept our eyes open. You see that person act and you think that doesn't line up with what they're preaching.
No, no. Yeah.
So in your book, you start and you end with that court case. And just a trigger warning for anyone listening, it is about sexual abuse. Can you give me a overview about what happened there and how all that felt?
You, oh, you bet. Yeah, I'll just kind of fly over it because it's quite an extended process. We left in 1996, and our daughters were 12 and 10 and like 18 months. Okay. And they're behind me on the wall there. And they, within a few months of leaving, my older girls, Brinny and Rachel, they told us that they had been molested by the senior pastor,
Hmm.
okay, who we lived communally with.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, it was just, we were so ill-equipped to handle anything like that. And we had hid so much sin and crime. And I mean, I wasn't the only druggie in that church. We were using a lot of drugs and covering over all kinds of really rotten things. So, but that was really something, as you can imagine, kick in the gut. So we marched our daughters and us. We didn't march them there. We said we need to go to the police and talk to them about this. And it was so strange because this was before police. Now the police, if they're any good, they handle it so differently. You have a trained child therapist, psychologist there, and how a child is interviewed is completely age appropriate. And not so with us in 1997. It was like an old episode of Dragnet. My daughters, we go walking into the police, and here's the detectives, two men, middle-aged men with their suits and ties, and they sit my daughters down. I don't know. I think they probably separated them at some point, but in this room that was practically like with the bare light bulb swinging above them, you know. And I was sitting out there in another room, talking to another detective who knew about our church, and I was and he had what looked like a crime tree, like the Gambino crime family tree. And I was pointing out to him, going, "Oh no, he's not that low. He's higher than that. No, she's in there somewhere." So it was a surreal experience. And at the end of the day, we left confident that an arrest would be made soon.
Yeah.
And we waited and waited for an investigation, and we entered that horrifically frustrating, heartbreaking world of the sexual abuse survivor, of waiting for the paperwork and the investigations and all of that to happen. And the police interviewed the other girls, and it became quite clear that that 7 or 8 of the girls at the church, including my two, had been abused. And there's them in their 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it became clear to us through the investigation that these kids had been abused, and so we all the more so felt it's just a matter of time. And by that time other adults had left the church too, so we were on the phone with each other going, "Did you hear anything? Did you hear anything? Okay, well, you got to call me right away." And then, and we were so confident because what he had done was so terrible. And then we heard, with it just a simple phone call, The district attorney decided to not take the case. Amazing.
Yeah.
There had been some cases recently in the news where religious leaders and day school or daycare operators had been falsely accused. And it was during a time when there was a lot of children or adults saying they had been abused, sexually abused in satanic rituals, but they hadn't, or at least not like, I don't know.
Yeah.
They just said they wouldn't take the case. And we called them and talked to them, and they gave me some kind of a story about the district attorney doesn't take the case if he's not certain that he'll win it.
Mm.
And I thought, how could he not be certain he's going to win it? He's got like 7 girls who have these statements of things. So obviously, this man is a pedophile. But they dropped it. Some of the girls recanted their reporting because they're still in the cult, and their parents found out about this interview that happened at school. And oh my goodness, these kids really got they got their minds set right on that about denying what they'd said. So Sharon and I, at that point in time, felt certainly betrayed by the police, or they're just disappointed in the police. And we began the journey of raising 2 adolescent girls who thought church was stupid, had been sexually abused by a pastor, and didn't trust the police, thought they were a bunch of boneheads.
Yeah.
What a way to go into adolescence. So they had all of the angst and challenges that you would expect of a sexual abuse victim who, as a pre-adolescent girl, goes to the police in all of that discomfort and then is told, no justice for you. So we basically just tried to put our lives together. We had been living we had no money and no credit or anything, so we worked on getting that together. I enrolled in seminary and felt that I wanted to continue ministry. And we bought a house and started being able to get credit cards, and because we'd ruined our credit in the church. So we just started building life back together and trying to form a home for the girls to grow up in, where we weren't pressuring them. I mean, if I had nothing to say to them about church, you have to go to church and all that. For what they'd been through, my feeling was just, hey, we love you guys and we're in this together, and whatever you're going to do by the time they're in their teen years, we just said, we love you no matter what you decide to do with your life and your religion. And I can understand why you don't maybe want to go to church, so.
Yeah. Oh, what a journey. And then fast forward to someday you got some phone call or some information that something.
Yeah. 2014. By then the girls are like in their 20s, okay, or early 30s. And most all of the girls that had been abused had left the church, not peacefully. Most of their parents stayed in the church, and they loaded a backpack, jumped out a bathroom window with their boyfriend, and left. That's the cult way. That's the way it is in cults. They break up families, and their parents are still in that church, a couple of them. So they, of course, they all met up with each other and started sharing stories. And I think, all of them had been in different kinds of therapy. A couple of them had children and on the way, and kids and everything. So they just started talking, and they ended up going to a lawyer, a really wonderful lawyer in Portland, and Kelly Clark was his name, and he's since passed away, but he was known nationally as the guy who, I think he brought down the Boy Scouts or something like that. He was quite an advocate for crimes against children. They went to him, And they said, we reported this in 1997, and this is what they said, and this is what happened, and so we're stuck. Is there any hope for justice? And he said, well, let's go report the crime again. And he said, I don't know what'll happen. I mean, but I know a cop's not going to tell you to leave the precinct, and they're not going to know what to do with you. But why don't you go in now and report this crime? Because it doesn't sound like half of you have even reported it. So they marched in, and they went into the police desk there and told this young officer sitting at the thing at the desk, we want to report a crime. And he said, oh, that's fine. What's the crime? And they said, well, it's sexual molesting of children. He goes, okay, who are the children? He goes, well, it's us. And he said, when did this happen? He said, 1990, 1991 or something like that. And so he said, you need to go upstairs. So they went upstairs, and whole new world, Christina. Now we got women on the force, and they are detectives and district attorneys, and they do not take kindly to men, anybody, but to pastors getting away with this. They picked up the case again, and they prosecuted it, and it was quite a trial. Big trial. It was in the Oregonian newspaper almost every day, and lots of press coverage. At the end of the day, there was only one victim who still was within the statute of limitations. Oregon presently has no statute of limitations on these kinds of crimes, but at the time, I think it was 12 years or something like that. But one of the girls, one of the younger ones, was still in it. So she, on behalf of her case, with the other girls acting as witnesses, they got a guilty verdict.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And that was in 2015.
Yeah.
Do you want me to show you the?
Yes.
Do you want me to show you the pictures?
Please.
They're pretty great. All right. This is the pastor being taken away to prison after being found guilty, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. A few pictures of him. That's him realizing, like I said earlier, the jig is up, and he soundly was defeated. I'll get back to how it wasn't perfect, but that's him looking at his people in the courtroom, going away to jail, cuffed, realizing I got caught.
Yeah.
And this is our side of the courtroom. And this officer here is standing there between the two sides because there was so much animosity and hatred in the courtroom. They had to have extra officers.
Wow.
A lot of real bad behavior there. And that's me hugging somebody, and my wife and son-in-law there. That's my oldest daughter, Bryn, and that's my middle girl, Rachel. And so you can see the emotion, and there's Sharon. Yeah. It was a big hug-a-thon. And there's Jessica. Yeah. And that is the assistant district attorney who prosecuted the case. Yeah. And there he is again. And my daughter, Rachel. Just a tremendous release after all of these years. And there's the courtroom scene. Now that is the cult. And they are not doing very well here. So they're just kind of taking it, taking it all in. The prosecuting district attorney, the judge. There's me hanging out with my son-in-law and some of the people in the courtroom. And there's Brinny and Rachel and Jessica. They always sat, the victims, they always purposefully sat in the very front row. They told their story, were in the newspaper with their faces and their names and their stories. And they just decided, this is kind of right before Me Too, the Me Too movement. They just decided, we're sick of this. We're not going to be hiding in secret because of this. So they're right there in the front. And that's pretty much it for the court. Let me
Let
see
me
if I can
ask
get rid of
you, I have two more questions as we close our conversation. Three actually, and I don't want to forget the third one. It's very important. But that kind of closure for the victims, for your daughters and the friends, and what does that do? Does that help?
That's a really good question. No, it does help in terms of a large validation of what happened to you, of after years of wondering if you live in a culture that tolerates that.
Mhm.
And my girls grew up thinking churches tolerate what happened to me.
Mhm.
The police, they tolerate what happened to me.
Right.
And so it's a tremendous validation to be in a court of law with people that are fighting for you and telling you over and over again every day, we are here because what happened to you is simply something that should put this man away for many years in prison.
Yeah.
So that is good. But in terms of the emotional healing and restoration that happens in this kind of abuse situation, um, no, they needed, and I believe everyone needs something deeper and more methodical that is a process over time to bring healing. It's good to be affirmed, but you carry so much with you that you are going to be disappointed if you looked for a final healing just through the court verdict. I think they all should go to jail. They all should be reported, and any pedophile should be removed from children forever. But the victims need so much more than just a judicial siding with them. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, I would imagine that that validation is powerful, and then also the knowing they're off the streets for a while. That in my
Yeah.
case, we the when once my cult survivors who had left, we had all left at different times, and we came together and we shared our stories, and we considered should we do some kind of legal
Yeah.
pursuing any kind of legal action, but where most of them came from was still such a place of fear and very
Mhm.
fundamentalist Bible reading. So they were thinking, oh, Paul says don't draw a brother in front of the world's judges.
Oh
They couldn't
yeah,
get past
yeah.
that. But then besides that, my father is now a retired prosecutor, and he himself said to me, don't go down that route. Because he just thought that would prolong everything and make it so complicated. In my case, I still have family in that group, so it
Oh yeah.
literally, yeah, has torn us apart too. Um, so I have always, what I was really wanting is that that man be taken off the streets, that the women especially that are so oppressed in that group, that they wouldn't have to take their kids and flee, but that their husbands would realize what but we know
Yeah.
that that's wishful thinking. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was kind of my second question. How did you, oh, well, I want to tie that into this other question of the cult. Are we now cynical? Are we just looking for the bad? Or are we just being realistic? Are we just, it acts like a cult. It probably is a cult. And who cares about the semantics? It's evil and evil and
Yeah. Yeah.
evil.
Oh man, that is really complicated because the internet and the wonderful opportunities of communication we have now. Like I wouldn't have found you unless I was searching for spiritual abuse stuff, and there you are, and was able to meet another survivor who's doing wonderful work. And so, yeah, there's great things about it, but also it provides a almost irresistible opportunity for lashing out and muckraking and just attacking with no hope of resolution. Um, if you identify a criminal act against anybody, especially children, you must go to the police. You must not go to the elder team. You go to the police, and then you might call an elder and say, hey, by the way, they'll, um, that's obedient citizenship in any kingdom, is to protect people. And so that's important. But beside that, just imposing the internet shame on somebody does not heal the victim. So there are many survivors of spiritual abuse out there I see, and they're friends of mine, that seem to be easily drawn into a cycle of finding the next wolf
Oh,
to expose so that nobody goes to their church or whatever reason. But personally, it it doesn't. This might be what your father was getting at. Unless you have a prosecutable crime that's going to stop somebody from being, you know, physically, sexually, financially abused, especially if they're children, unless you have that scenario, it's not going to work. It's going to be really rough. That's driven people to the internet more. And it's a real mixed bag. And as a helper who's in this world of wanting to empathize and educate and help my fellow survivors, sometimes it feels a little bit like you're swimming with sharks. And I don't mean because people hate me or something like that, but there's a lot of free floating anger and rage, which is completely understandable, but it's not abated through exposure and communication. There needs to be some heart work with professional therapy and time and things like that. So the idea of call it a cult, find it a cult, and then go after it and tell people, hey, that's a cult, that's a cult. I don't even use that word much anymore, to tell you the truth. Yeah.
And I had to make that decision too early on in my when I started my first interviews. Am I going to name names? Am I going to be really specific? And people keep to this day ask me, so what was the name of that thing? But the point is, those are little fish. So sure, they're piranhas, they're sharks,
Yeah.
they get you, but the ocean is big, and why not talk about what unhealthy people do versus pointing at the unhealthy people? Because we are, for me, and I think you're the same way, we're in the empowering business. We want to raise people up so that they can think for themselves, that they can recognize
Yes.
abuse themselves. So it's more empowering to say, this is what we believe abuse looks like, all the various forms it manifests. And that is much more empowering than saying, oh, make sure you stay away from that one church and that one over there.
Yes, that's excellent. And I would point out the only thing that brought us into that world of naming names and saying here they are was when it became a criminal investigation by Portland police, and the Oregonian newspaper pursued us and said, hey, we'll really go for this if you want. And we said, sure, because we saw that as a way to put them out of commission and hopefully not be able to abuse children. But prior to that time, which is almost 10 years, we didn't name names or do anything like that. It seemed irrelevant. And I mean, what do you do? Name names because somebody has a doctrine you don't like, or
Right. Yeah.
something that, or committed a crime, but the police didn't, they washed their hands of it. So who am I to go out and
Yeah.
do that? So I absolutely agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
So that was awesome to hear, all of you. I'm not hoping to put you on the spot, but I've made a commitment to the transgender community to always ask from now on, is the safe space that you've created, your acronym, is that something where transgender men and women and non-binary people can go and they are just welcomed, or are they expected in some secret path, like to change at some point? Is that
Uh,
where I can send people freely
Yeah, yeah,
love and something.
absolutely, absolutely not. And um, we certainly always have uh, gays in in our meetups, and also transgender and various things like that. I'm not always sure because I don't, we're so low key. I don't ask or anything,
Yes.
but we have been contacted specifically by transgender and LG, and all of that stuff that have been abused by the church and churches. And this is probably something that what we would call good churches. And by that, I mean Orthodox Christian teaching churches who are full of sweet, nice people and pastors who aren't narcissistic abusers. They're just, trying to do their best. But man, have they done damage and pain to this world. And that's a frontier that the church, I guess I would say it's still in the phase of being exposed, but it has not begun to address yet.
Yeah.
So that's the church. But in terms of the safe meetups, it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, some people have. One therapist spoke to me about how can we make sure everybody knows this is a safe place for gays. And this therapist suggested putting a rainbow on our website, and I could completely understand with her desire to do that, but we already had gay people in it that were dear friends and coming. That wasn't a problem so far. But I said, for our safe meetups, it's very important to me that we're a safe place for homophobic white supremacists to come and get some help.
Yeah. So for
And I
everyone.
don't, yeah, I don't want to put a symbol on what we're doing to say, well, by the way, if you don't,
Right.
if you're not right, you might not be comfortable here. I got to be careful about that because I really want everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that is quite an undertaking. But I appreciate you. I don't want to make less of it by saying by trying, but you are doing it, and I appreciate you sharing about it. If you ever have a virtual version of it, let me know. That one I could attend.
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Well, I think we almost got you to, I don't remember, but we were having a conference before COVID hit.
And I was
I
gonna
think I
go.
asked,
Yeah,
oh
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you had a friend in Portland.
Yes, I do. I still have a friend. They moved a little bit away, but yeah, that's still there. Yeah.
Well, you got a couple friends in Portland now.
Thank you.
And and if we do that again, which we probably will, because the first time we did it, we had 70 people
Wow.
and everybody loved it. And then of course COVID hit. But yeah, it would just be, it's just a wonderful way to do that. And if I'm ever able to bring you in on it on that level, not only the virtual thing, I would love to, Christina. Yeah.
Same here. I would love that too. I think we are, as a society, as a church, as anyone, as humans, just I feel that inside of me and in other people, desperate to just have community that is not in like in light or in spite of our differences, but maybe we all have this one core desire, and that is to be humans together without
Hmm.
excluding one group, or like, oh, we are the accepted ones, just be humans together and experience healthy, like just trying together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like,
We should do a safe meetup where you live.
yeah, we can talk about
It's
that.
so easy. It's so easy. You just get on Facebook and you just create an event, and then you, like, 30 people will say they're coming and you'll end up with 10. you know
Yeah.
and you just make it at a great place, like a bar, a pub, you can do a church depending on your culture. Here church is fine because nobody grew up going to church very much, so they think it's cool to come to an old church. But
Ah,
in other places church would be very triggering for people. And then you just kind of get together. We've been talking about how to bring safe on the road, my partner and I. Ashlyn Hilliard, she works with ICSA, International Cultic Studies. And I don't know, our hope is in the future to kind of make a traveling on the road experience of a meetup for spiritual abuse survivors that is no commitment. You just come and you get connected into some resources and spend some time with people that get it and don't look at you like you have a horn growing out of your
Yeah.
brain.
Yeah.
You know, like when I would tell people, yeah, we sold 2 houses to live closer to the church, and we live in a rent. We rent a bedroom now, and no, I don't want that promotion. I'm following the Lord. No, I'm not gonna go back to school. And I mean, it was so crazy that when I would first try to explain it, when I left my group, I felt like they were looking at me like I was a Klingon or something. Or I mean, so you need to have an experience with other survivors, especially it's best if they're from the group you were in,
Mm.
but other survivors that don't look at you that way and just go, I know, you gave him every penny, didn't you?
Yeah. 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 Never stopped hoping until you did. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful wealth of wisdom. Will you hold up your book one more time?
you bet. Can I
Where?
hold up another book too after this one?
Oh, where can people get this one though? Is it Amazon or
It's on Amazon
In the House of
and
Friends
it's
by
on
Ken Garrett?
Kindle. In the House of Friends, I'll send you a link. Um, it's really good, and then and so yeah, you can just order it on Amazon.
You
And
think it's
I
really
don't mean,
good?
you
That we-
know, I haven't been able to say that. And it wasn't until this last few months, my youngest daughter, she said, Dad, you're a terrible promoter.
Mm,
You need to, this is a great book. And I give it out to my friends and everything. So when I think about it, it's not the subtle power of spiritual abuse. I mean, that book was life changing and it
mm,
was very, very, very good. But for what it's supposed to do, this is a really good book.
mm.
And so yeah, and then okay,
Yeah.
enough about me. Here's the book with me. This is a new one by the International Cultic Studies Association.
Wounded Faith, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Abuse by
Right.
Dr. Neil Dangard.
Amgard. He's a
Amgard.
retired pastor. And we were all kind of putting in our votes for the title, and I didn't even know I was doing it, but I ended up suggesting a title that's like my title.
Oh, yeah. Whoops. It was
And
really
I swear to God, I did not try to do it, but I'm looking at it now and I'm going, wow, understanding and healing, you know.
right.
But I wrote 2 chapters in this book. I wrote a chapter on the experience of a person coming to church after spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
And that chapter is called When the Walking Wounded Walk into Church. And then some of the things they go through. And then I really wanted to, I'm glad they let me do this because the International Cultic Studies Association is not a Christian organization. It's for all cults and wonderful friends there, and you know Christians there and everybody else. But I really wanted to do a exegetical treatment of something in the Bible to address spiritual abuse and the experience of the victim,
Mm.
because a lot of people say, "Well, the Bible's the problem." You know, that's the problem with spiritual abuse, and I wanted to employ what I felt was responsible and of course me thinking proper exegesis of a text of scripture. So the other chapter I did is a treatment of Psalm 137,
Mm.
which is where it's by the rivers of Babylon, and I approach it as the experience of a survivor of spiritual abuse. But the psalm ends with, you know, may their little ones be dashed against the rocks. And you know, many Christians, when you know that's kind of thrown out as, hey, that seems abusive, and the Bible's saying that, I wanted to treat that in a way of experiencing or explaining how a survivor of abuse hungers for justice.
Mm.
And it's not always pretty, and it's not always morally sounding right, but I believe God is big enough to hear us saying some pretty painful things about our hunger for justice. And so anyway, I kind of tried to do that, and this is the book. It just came out last month,
Wounded
and
Faith.
that's available on Amazon too. So
All right. Well, here was your promotion. Thank you so much. That is very interesting. I hope
yeah.
you consider getting it. And well, I will let you go, and I'm looking forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much for sharing so much deep stuff. And thank you to your daughters too, for being so, I don't know, brave. Always sounds trite. I so appreciate that they were open and vocal and shared what they had been through.
I will convey that to them, and they'll be watching this too. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you. Bye, Ken.